Hello and welcome. The Global Association of Risk Professionals, also known as GARP, has partnered with SAS to bring you a brand new podcast, The New Age of Risk Analytics, about the evolution of risk and finance integration into the new digital era. Hello and welcome to the New Age of Risk Analytics podcast. We're at the SAS Global Forum. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Valeria Sika, Global Trade Services Head at Citi, and Jake Jacobson, Technology Advisory Partner, EY. Today at the forum, they spoke on transforming trade compliance through machine learning and natural language processing. We just saw that session. It was a great session, so we want to share some insights with our listeners who couldn't be with us. So, firstly, I would ask each of you to tell us a bit about yourself and the role that you play at the organization you're with.
Thank you, Larissa. I'd love to be here today. So I've been with Citi for 26 years, always in trade and different roles. First in Argentina, and that's where my accent is from. Then working for the Latin America region, and since 2012 in a global role around trade services.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Lisa, and thanks for having us here today. So I have kind of two hats that I wear at EY. I really spend most of my time every day working with clients on financial crimes compliance. Right, I've been doing that for about 20 years through a number of different professional services firms, and really everything in and around the people, the process, and the technology change required to keep up with the evolving set of regulatory expectations and actual threats on the landscape. The other thing I do is as our business evolves, we have to continue to innovate in how we deliver value to our clients, which means we need to introduce new services, new business models that really deliver outcomes-based business value for our clients. So I help lead the technology aspects of building out our solutions and managed services business.
Great, thank you. I know you have an exciting project to tell us about because I got the benefit of being in today's session. But can you tell us what brings you today to the Global SAS Forum?
Absolutely. And this morning we issued a press release as well, so everybody hopefully saw that. And it's around a project that is designed to detect transactions with potential compliance concerns, so we can spend the time looking at those transactions, the data points, and trying to see if there's anything that could reflect a money laundering concern or fraud or something that needs to be escalated and taken care of.
Do you want to say anything else about the project?
No, I think she covered it. I guess one other element of that is really the interesting and really valuable partnership that EY, SAS, and Citi have put together to meet this first-of-a-kind industry challenge. We'll talk more about it. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of really difficult technical and functional problems that we're trying to solve. So the unique value that the three parties bring together really positions us for the best chance of success in this.
Thank you. I want to step back a little bit, and can you give us some background on what the key objectives are? What are the elements of financial crime that every organization, especially large global institutions, are contending with? What kinds of financial crimes are we talking about? I think, most of our audience is going to assume we're talking about anti-money laundering, anything that has to do with terrorism financing. Are there other elements of financial crime that this is intended to address, whether it's embezzlement or human trafficking or red flags on any of other issues that I might not have thought of?
Yeah, and at least I think you've hit the big topics, right? But as they say, the devil's in the details. And so as you start to drill in topics like AML, human trafficking, terrorist financing, the items that we're solving for, in addition to the direct AML risk elements, are boycott clauses, sanctions, the import and export of military and dual-use goods, certain aspects of fraud that are unique to the trade finance industry. And then there are some other things around the flow of capital in and out of certain jurisdictions that have regulatory requirements around that. It gets pretty nuanced. But really, I think the regulatory driver of this is primarily the AML and the sanctions concern within the trade finance business. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Can you give us some context on how trade compliance has been approached traditionally so that we'll understand what's changing now?
Absolutely. So compliance has been approached in a very manual way. When you think about how trade operates today, where 95% of the transactions are still paper-based. So you get paper, a bill of lading, an invoice, and you need to go through the information that you have in the paper. That's all you have. And based on that, you have to make a determination on whether there is a violation of any of the compliance concerns that we have. So it's been extremely manual, transaction by transaction. Everything is on a one-on-one basis, and we rely on very manual processes to know what happened before and trying to understand if this is a transaction that needs to be escalated.
In a paper environment, it seems to me, since you can't look horizontally, you're going to get more layers of processing. You're more likely to get sort of red flags or hits on them. And does that make the process even more labor intensive than just the paper?
So that's a challenge we have with the technology, to make sure that by introducing technology in the process, we don't increase the number of false positives. And we've been working and training the engine on the transactions that were escalated over the past 3 years. So trying to understand the characteristics of those transactions and kind of telling the engine, look for that. Don't look for everything, because if not, you're going to give me a very large number of false positives that will increment the manual process, and we want to avoid that.
Yeah, I think too, Valeria, there is a certain inefficiency in the purely manual-based process where operators do lack that time-based and network-based awareness of what's going on. So similar risk items or even identical risk items can be escalated time and time again without that awareness that it's been previously looked at, it's been investigated, we've determined it's not a risk, and so we don't need to keep repeating that process every time something similar comes through.
Okay, great. Thank you. That really helps. What are some of the other limitations of the paper model that new technologies are hoping to address?
So some of the limitations we have in the manual process is to manage large data sets. So we have a lot of information that our operators need to go through, and a lot of checks they need to make in every single set of documents to identify the potential concerns. So that's what we are trying to solve for. So we're not asking the machine to make the decision. We're asking the machine to detect the cases that have more risk. So then we can focus on understanding the interaction of all the data points and making the decision from the current processes and the BAU. So this is more at the level 0 or the maker function. It's not to replace the compliance function. And that to me is very critical at this stage of the development, because we are not there yet. So it's more of a detection engine that then can lead to a proper decision.
Yeah, and I think some of the surrounding technology challenges that we're looking to address is really in the core digitization of the data. 90% of any analytics problem is really prepping and organizing the data so that you can then develop and execute good analytics against it. And in a complex paper environment, that's really a difficult challenge. So really trying to drive further into deeper and deeper insights extracted from the transactions and the documents involved is going to be critical long term to kind of the upper bound of potential of what analytics can do in the trade space. I mean, I think everyone thinks that eventually disruptive technologies like blockchain will really dramatically shift the landscape. But it's going to take some time given the complexity of the ecosystem around trade and the number of really disparate stakeholders that operate in this space across the entire kind of supply chain. So the nature of and the complexity of the documentation within the trade space is rather unique relative to a lot of the other problems that we're trying to solve with these emerging technologies like NLP.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I keep hearing about these new technologies is that they're not there to replace the humans. They're there to make their systems more efficient and more accessible, and to empower them. And I'm getting the message from you that you're finding that's your goal as well, and that it remains, the crux of it is needing the human behind the machine to decipher what you're.
Yes, because I think we need to walk before we run. And bringing this technology into our processes today it requires a big mind shift because it's new. We were always relying on people looking at the transactions on the paper, and now that's going to be replaced by an engine. So we need to understand what the engine is doing and kind of walk by slowly and feel comfortable with it. Given our industry is very conservative, and particularly in this area, we need to be very careful to maintain our standards or even have better standards from where we are today by the added technology. But we want to make sure that we go very slowly and we are comfortable with what the engine is doing and with the hope that it's going to give us more information so we make the proper decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, we've all heard about AI and natural language processing and machine learning and computer vision. Can you illuminate for us what that means in this context? What is important for us to understand about what machine learning is in the trade context and what natural language processing does for this process?
Yeah, certainly, because all these technologies really exist on a spectrum, right? If you really think about machine learning being on kind of the simple end of the spectrum of more advanced AI, natural language processing being the first step towards natural language understanding. We're progressing through these steps quickly, but we're still on the early stages of some of these things. So within the trade space, really, machine learning allows us to apply a highly structured and rigorous data science approach to a problem where we're trying to convert human-based judgment into a machine-based model. And the reason that rigor is important is A, it gets us to a better outcome quicker, right? Because we don't have to go down a kind of hypothesis-driven trial and error type approach. But B, it really creates an end-to-end math-based exercise that can be clearly documented, controlled, and explained to all the different stakeholders who really need to approve and inspect this type of risk model down the road, right? So that is one of the big advantages of a data science approach as opposed to a rules-based or judgment-based approach, right? We can show the math very clearly. Here's the 3 models that we tested. This is why this model was selected. It performed the best. We have an ongoing maintenance approach of making sure that model continues to operate in bounds and isn't getting out of whack or starting to identify things we don't want it to, and then that holds up very well. So it's almost ironic, right? Because a year and a half ago, we were having conversations about whether or not we thought regulators would let us go this direction. Now the regulators are saying, we get it, we expect you to go this way. And it also paves the way for a much clearer and better governed approach to implement machine-based controls to replace what used to be a human-based kind of judgment-driven process.
Yeah, I think it's probably easier to regulate a model than it is to say, well, Fred has a knack for this.
Right. So Fred's seen this situation 10 times before, and he knows that, that this is what's risky and this is what is not risky. Well, that's awfully hard to, first of all, you can't scale that process across,
right.
A people-based organization. And secondly, what about when Fred turns out to be wrong, right? How do you prove?
Right. And does that elevate the Freds? Because then they can sort of QC the models, or they can add, perspective to it. Absolutely. And exactly.
Look, and not just in trade, but across, financial crime, AML specifically, there's so many systems that are producing volumes and volumes of alerts where organizations have been built at scale just to keep up with the volume. And I think it's widely recognized in the industry that where we want to get to is to a point where people are doing what people do best, which is make decisions and apply judgment, as opposed to sifting through paper, compiling information, and really the administrative tasks that the models are much better at doing.
So what I would like to add is when we started the project, we gave the team like few mandates. For example, no rules. Absolutely no rules, because rules need to be maintained over time. So we wanted this to be done with the technology in a way that the technology learns by itself over time and how the behavior changes. So we don't have any subjectivity in the project. The other mandate was we need to do this real time. And that's why the SAS solution really is ideal for this and is helping us, because that means you need to manage and process a lot of information in a fraction of a second to give a response, because there's a client waiting for that transaction to be processed. So real time for us was very important because that's how the process is done today. And we thought that if we are adding technology, it should at least have the same standard or better. So for us, those 2 points were very critical and really drove most of the reasons to partner with SAS and with ÜBER to make this happen.
One interesting, or I think critical element there is as we move away from rules, we move into machine learning and adaptive models. The concept of explainable AI is really paramount, which is really, no black box analytics here, right? It has to be perfectly explainable, documented, and understood, both by, the business, who are the ultimate acceptors of the risk, the risk and compliance functions within the bank, who are responsible for ensuring proper risk controls, and then the regulators too, right? To be able to look at it post facto and say, yeah, we understand what's going on. We're just not ready for, we don't have kind of the track record to be able to implement black box analytics where we just have ultimate trust in the model.
Well, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And it's good that you're, I think there's a perception that regulators are, some kind of police officers that come in and shut things down. And what you see in the day-to-day, what we see with the people that we interview and that we talk to is there's an ongoing partnership involved in this, and there is a give and take, and that both pushes the other to move forward. We hope at GARP we're part of that process. I was going to ask you a little bit about the explainability. How do you communicate the complexity of the analytics to people who maybe don't have that kind of programming background? How are you ramping up the people in those positions who are experiencing this technology for the first time?
So as I mentioned in the general session, it's really critical to partner with these functions from the very beginning. So for us also has been an interesting journey and an education to understand what the technology can do, what is real, what is kind of the hype out there that is going to resolve everything. And if you kind of go step by step and understanding, and this requires time. It takes time. You need to go through all your policies to understand what needs to be checked, to understand what are the data points and how you combine the policies with the data checks and the engine and kind of all evolves at the same pace. So it's not a project to do in isolation and then to show to compliance or we develop this. That will never work in my mind. That's a personal view. You need to go with them and get their input and kind of design the solution together. So you get to a point where everybody understands more. And EY hosts a lot of lunch and learn sessions in City as we go through the project. And we are learning a lot throughout and kind of getting understanding on how this works.
Yeah, Valeria, I'd like to echo your requirement of time, right?
Yes.
Because there's certainly a learning curve here, right? For everyone who isn't a data scientist, which is almost everyone involved in the initiative, to understand the difference between feeling comfortable with something and being able to prove mathematically, that feeling. And so, the old standard of take the most conservative approach, make sure that there's absolutely zero risk. That works, but it'll ultimately, result in replicating the current people-based process within the system. And that's not really the objective here. The objective is to really change the game in how we're approaching these risks and solving for them, and set up, Citi and our other clients in the industry for the next couple of decades of how these risks really need to be managed.
Well, speaking of that, how do you foresee the technological advancements here will impact positively a reduction in large-scale financial crime? And what's the kind of arc that is anticipated for this level of partnership?
Well, first of all, I think we're going to get far more transparency into what the true nature of the risk is. We operate on a lot of assumptions around the amount of money that moves, the amount of illicit money that moves through the trade network. And that's based on anecdotal evidence, and the more information that we get structured and organized into data lakes and data models, or to apply the analytics, we're really going to understand the nature of the risk. So that's, I think, point number one. Point number two is, we're gonna really benefit by the rapid advancement of natural language processing and natural language understanding, because at the root of this problem is getting information out of documents, and really a diverse set of documents. We've as an industry, we've essentially solved for things like how do you digitize a loan underwriting form, right? But that's where the bank fully controls the form, they know exactly which field all the information is in. But if you start to look at the diverse documents that flow through trade, customs forms and insurance forms and bills of ladings and invoices, and across a really diverse set of stakeholders with varying levels of technology adoption, it's not going to work long term for us to have to map out every document that comes through and tell the machine where to look for each piece of information. As NLP advances, and NLP can really make sense of the document and understand the information that's on there, and then bring it into an environment that then we can start to really, take advantage of the analytics. That's going to be the big driver of advancement here, I think.
Yeah, it seems to be that the opportunity for patterns that have been unrecognizable, given the silos of people examining paper, it seems like obviously the potential for data is that connections will be made that nobody knew were there before.
Yeah, if you're a data science professional, you get really excited about challenges like this, right? Because we've got 2 or 3 of the the hardest kind of AI problems that are out there, coexisting within this domain.
Is there anything else you guys want to tell us about the project or your process at this critical juncture? Because I think there are so many people who are going to end up going through this as a matter of course, and your insights will surely be welcome to them.
So I would make 2 comments. One, we are a bank. We're not an investigations unit. So what we are developing is for us to comply with our current regulatory requirements. And that's the context and the scope. So we're not trying to find the 3rd or 4th level of interaction between the parties, because our obligation is to manage what is at hand and kind of understand what's going on with these transactions. So to me, that's important with the team to understand really the scope of what we are doing. The second point I'd like to make, if anyone is going to engage in a project like this, is number 1, you need to be very patient. It takes time. You need to be extremely flexible, because the goals that you set for the next 3 months will most likely change as you go through the process and have new learnings on how this can be done. But with all that, we're managing this project within the principle that we're not going to compromise quality for time. So we're not rushing to make this happen, because it's very sensitive and it needs to be done right. So we're taking the time that we need to make sure that it works.
I think that's super important, because I think there is that very much the fear of missing out on this technology. And if you implement it incorrectly, you really are missing out.
And we have all the control functions reviewing what's being done and making sure that we're going the right path, because that's the risk and we can't afford that. So we'll definitely are going very slow and making sure that what we are doing is right.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for your time. I hope that you have a great rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delisa.
Thank you, Delisa.
Thank
nice
you.
being
Enjoy
here.
the conversation.
And thank you for joining us on the new age of risk analytics. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to be notified of future episodes and visit sas.com/risk for information on these and other risk topics.